Has this ever happened to you? You're scoring really well on practice exams, maybe even in the 90th percentile, but then you go to the real test or one of the AMC full lengths, and all of a sudden your score tanks. Why does this happen, and what can we do to prevent this? There are three key factors at MCAT Savior that we believe significantly affect the performance of each student on the real test day. So we're going to explain each of these factors in turn, and then what students can do to combat them. The first one, and probably the biggest issue that we see across the board, is application of strategy. Since MCAT Savior is a very heavy strategy-based course, it's weird that we would think that application of strategy is the difficult part on test day, but it's not so much that the strategy is hard to apply, it's more so that it's very hard to remember to apply strategy on test day. This can happen for a ton of reasons. There's just an immense amount of test pressure on test day. Students are going to be very, very stressed. And as a part of that intense test pressure and stress, oftentimes they can just simply forget to apply either all of their test strategy or part of it. In fact, in post-test review with thousands of students, we found that 60 to 80% of all students forget to apply either part or whole test strategy concepts. You might think this number is pretty crazy, but honestly, it just isn't. And this doesn't necessarily only apply to average scoring students. Even very high spec students who are scoring 90th or above in practice tests often walk into the actual exam and just forget to apply parts of their strategy. The test pressure, the anxiety, and the stress all combine to create a perfect storm that makes it very easy for students to forget what they're supposed to do in certain situations and use the test taking and timing strategy that they've so painstakingly learned. What we tell students to do is to just take a deep breath during a lot of these situations and then write somewhere on their test paper, remember to apply strategy. Even a simple reminder like this, when easily seen in your visual field, can always reset your brain and help you keep on track with your test taking and timing skills so that you don't get swamped by the exam on test day by forgetting to apply the strategy. Because a big key component of the way that a lot of the MCAT Savior strategy is built is it's specifically built to take on the AMC on test day itself when the pressure and the difficulty increases drastically. So forgetting to apply it means that you're leaving points on the table, and that's not something we want to happen. The second major factor that we believe affects almost every student to various degrees is test anxiety. The MCAT is hard, and the way it presents itself on test day is really, really hard, especially when you're starting with such a difficult section like Chem Phys, which we know is set up to help students doubt themselves, basically. That fosters a lot of anxiety that kind of tumbles through the rest of the exam. And at the end of the day, it's just a hard test. So for students who have significant anxiety going into the exam, the real test magnifies that anxiety much more than the practice exams. So students can have fluctuating performance levels that would never have shown up in a practice, but only show up on test day when they get past their certain anxiety threshold where they start to miss points. There really isn't an easy fix for underlying test anxiety, especially when it only shows up in real test-taking situations. But one of the most effective countermeasures that we've developed here at MCAT Savior, and it's used commonly for many, many situations in which people get anxious in general, is just deep breaths using belly breathing techniques. Students who train with this type of breathing technique in practices often resort to breathing that way on exams, which helps slow down their thoughts and ease their anxiety. That being said, not every technique is going to work for every student. So it's good to try out many different ways of managing your anxiety. And if you have significant anxiety that you feel needs to be seen by a medical professional, you shouldn't be afraid to seek out help. The third key reason why the real test scores fluctuate so drastically from practice exams is because the real exam pretty much looks nothing like practices. And if you want a quick example of this, take a look at AMC's FL1 that they released and take a look at AMC's FL4. These look like two completely different exams from two completely different test makers. When you jump from the most recent FL to the real exam, you're going to find that there's a similar disconnect because the real exam gets changed constantly to make it more challenging and, of course, make it more difficult for students to score high. So, in this situation, when students get into the real test, they start to act differently. We call it going cowboy. And what this basically means is that students who have a certain test-taking methodology and have always used this test-taking methodology and built that up over thousands of hours of practice and strategy lessons and timing lessons often go to test day and, like we discussed, forget their strategy. But a different thing that they also do is that they make up strategy or new ways of taking the test on the spot. This is a fine balancing act because at the end of the day, the MCAT is a very heavily critical thinking based test, so you will have to adapt to new question styles and passage formats on test day to adapt your approach to make sure it's optimal. At the same time though, the test doesn't change that much at a fundamental level. So if your skills are very fundamental based, like what we teach at MCAT Savior, you're going to be applying most of those skills to the real test just like you applied to practice with minimal issue. But what happens when students go cowboy is they basically start creating brand new ways to handle every single question. And what this does is it basically throws off their score. For example, the MCAT is on a curve. So on a normal test, let's say a practice test 1, you miss 8 questions in Chem Phys. Okay, that seems all right. It's a pretty good score. Let's say that everyone else, when you miss 8, they miss 12. On the real test, this is going to change a significant amount because the real test is harder. So you're going to miss a lot more questions, but your scaled score might still be the same. So let's say you miss 12 in Chem Phys. Well, technically, if you're missing 12, then everyone else would be missing around 18. Let's just hold these ratios as constant. The issue is when students get into the situation, this only happens if you take the test the exact same way you took this test. If you get to the real test though, and completely go cowboy, forget your strategy, forget your test-taking skills, and start creating new strategy and some skills on the spot to get answers, you're not going to miss just 12. You'll probably miss a lot more than 12, and you might even end up missing the same amount as everyone else would be missing. So remember, it's graded on a curve. If you're missing a set amount of points and you know you consistently miss only a certain number of points, everyone else is probably missing more. But if you go cowboy and forget your skills and forget the application, this can lead you into a lot of trouble, and that's why you have very big score shifts that occur when you go from practice AAMC scored FLs to the real thing. Of course, dealing with all 3 of these factors is not easy, and this is something we've dealt with thousands of students. It's just hard, but being aware of them will at least give you some perspective on how you can prevent them from happening on test day and hopefully increase your score. Alright, that was a complicated lesson. If you still need help, check out our full-length blog post that we linked in the video description, explore more of our YouTube channel, or just head on over to MCATsavior.com where you can get all of our strategy courses for free.